An ominous sound rings through the air as the five friends drive the mountain roads of West Virginia. "Do you hear that?" Cindy asks John. "Hear what?" John replies. "That sound. It sounded like the ominous foreboding tones you hear in a movie before something bad happens," Cindy says. "I didn't hear anything. Maybe it's just the damn radio again," John says, pounding at the dash. A thumping sound then begins to reverberate through the van, interrupting John Denver on the radio. The van shudders, waking Mary and Bob, who had been leaning on each other in the back of the van as they slept. John pulls the van to the side of the road and exits to inspect. "What the fuck?" John utters to himself in the dark, misty night as he circles the van and finds the damage. Some pieces of scrap metal had punctured the two front tires. "We can't get this repaired tonight. Not all the way out here," Frank says. "I'll head down the road and see what I can find." Frank begins heading down the road in the direction they were driving, while John, Cindy, Bob, and Mary light some cigarettes and hang out by the van. A tractor trailer steams by. Bob waves his arm at the truck, but the truck keeps rolling on. "Guess we ain't screwing tonight," Bob says to Mary. Mary looks at Bob, annoyed, and slaps him across the face. Bob laughs heartily. "You think you guys would get enough of that?" Cindy says. "Not me," Bob says, shooting a cheeky look at Mary, who is tired and peeved, shivering with a blanket over her shoulders. In 2005, Hamilton High holds a masquerade ball. Little Jimmy LaBelle, a lonely student who lives in a trailer park with his mother, prepares for the ball. He paints his face mask, applying gold spirals as his mother cooks in the kitchen. "I don't want to go," Jimmy says. "You have to go, Jimmy. It's your senior year, and you never go to any of the events," his mother responds. "I'm just going to get bullied. None of the girls are going to want to dance with me." "That's why you have that mask there. They used to be used for anonymity. Any class could mix with any class. Men could be women. Women could be men. You can be whoever you want, Jimmy. It will be a good experience." Frank spots the weathered sign of a campground reading "Lost Hollow," the signboard almost falling from the signpost. He heads into the campground and approaches a shabby building, appearing to be the campground office. It has one light bulb on outside. He opens the creaky door and enters the office. A droopy-faced old man with a walker comes slowly out from the neighboring room and into the dimly lit office. "Sorry to bother you, sir," Frank says. The man's head angled down as a result of his posture, gazing at Frank from the tops of his eyes. "Me and my friends are just broke down the road. Couple of flats. Don't think we're getting out of here tonight. You have any space for the night?" The man grumbles, writing into a notebook. "Got a couple spots for you. We'll be 40 for the night. 2A and 2B, the man says. "Fantastic, thank you. I'll be back with my friends," Frank says, turning to exit the office. "Just to let you know, we've had some killings recently," the man says. Frank pauses, trying to figure out if he had heard the man correctly. "Killings? Like, of people?" Frank asks. "Yep, a few incidents a couple weeks back. Reports of a masked man of some sort. Case is still open. See, right here," the man says, pulling out a newspaper with the reports. "But I just paid you. Are you fucking with me?" Frank asks. "I wish I was. If you just keep nice and quiet, you should be fine," the man says. Frank stands, dumbfounded with his mouth open. "If you decide to come back, your spots will be down that first road on the left. Bathrooms and showers are in the building next to here," the man says, motioning his head to the right. "Right. Thank you," Frank says. "Don't be making too much noise now. Don't want to let that killer get you," the man says with a grin as Frank exits the office. Frank returns to the van with the news. "You're just fucking with us," Mary says. "Fuck off, Frank." "I'm dead serious. Go ask the man for yourself," Frank responds. "He was probably just fucking with you," Bob says. "I asked him that. He showed me the news. No one's fucking with anyone," Frank says. The crew decides to go on and suss out the situation and speak with the man themselves. They load up the backpacks and camping gear from the van. At the office, the man shows the others the news clippings of the story. "Bowling pins," Bob says, reading the clippings. "Quite handy with them," the old man says. "I've been watching some shows on serial killers," Frank says. "Fascinating stuff, often eccentric, very charismatic personalities." The group looks at Frank without response. "So, what do we do?" Cindy asks. "Come on, let's stay. It'll be fun," Mary says. The group is silent. What? Are you guys scared of a little serial killer? Ooh, Mary says, teasingly. It's just one night, John says. What are the odds he's active tonight? We'll take off first thing tomorrow. Jimmy LaBelle walks timidly into the Hamilton High School gymnasium. Medieval music plays through the speakers. Roasted turkey legs and an assortment of sides sit on a long table. A mime performs in the center of the gymnasium. A group of people are standing in a circle, socializing. Jimmy walks up to the circle. A person turns to look at him, nods at him, and makes a space for him as he joins the circle, who are chatting and laughing. A few others look at him, but don't seem to treat him the same way as usual. Jimmy's body language becomes looser. A juggler later performs in the center of the gymnasium. The juggler randomly selects Jimmy, asking him to come to the center and join him. The juggler quickly shows Jimmy how to juggle 2 pins and hands them to Jimmy. Jimmy stands frozen, nervous, wanting to duck back into the crowd. How the hell did he get selected for this? The crowd begins cheering in excitement. Jimmy then begins tossing the 2 pins between his hands, but he can't judge the rotation of the pins and keeps dropping them. The juggler shows him again, and Jimmy tries again, but he drops them again. Jimmy feels humiliated. The crowd is now beginning to laugh at him. Jimmy can't take it anymore. He turns and fires a pin at Mikey Franco, hitting him square in the head, knocking him to the ground. A teacher rushes into the circle and pulls Jimmy from the gymnasium. Jimmy is sent home from the Hamilton High masquerade ball. Jimmy lies down in his bed, still wearing his full costume and mask, his hands folded on his chest, looking at his ceiling, thinking about the way Mikey Franco looked as he fell to the ground. The crew follows behind Frank as he leads the way through the dark campground. As the crew walks to their site, they pass some campsites surrounded by yellow caution tape. "Did you hear that?" Cindy says, as the ominous sound fills the air again. "Are you sure we should stay? It really seems like a bad omen." "I think I'm hearing that," Frank says. "It's probably just the wind," John says. Frank goes up to one of the taped-off campsites and shines his light upon it. "What the fuck are you doing?" Bob says to Frank. "Whoa, blood," Frank says. "Can we please just go back? I'll sleep in the van," Cindy says. "You'll be sleeping alone, babe," Bob says, "and it ain't safe sleeping on the side of the road." The crew sets up their tents on the site. "Beers?" Frank asks, pulling a can of Budweiser from his backpack. "I'll take one for the showers," John says, throwing a towel over his shoulder, holding out his hand to Bob, who hands him a beer. John heads off to the washroom building. Frank throws the cans to the other 4. Cindy cracks her beer, getting sprayed all over the face. Cindy wipes at her face. "Ah, disgusting." John walks into the washroom building and flicks on a blinking light. The floors are filthy, and it smells like piss. Piss flies flying about. He hangs his towel, takes off his clothes, and starts up the shower. The steaming water begins to pour out, and he places his hand under the steam, feeling the warmth. "Ah, perfect," he says to himself, sighing in satisfaction as he begins to lather himself in body wash and enjoy the hot water, letting the steam pass over his face. John then glances into the washroom mirror from the shower and sees the figure of a tall man wearing a black hoodie, jeans, baseball cap, and a Venetian face mask, half gold, half black. The mask looks human but infantile, with black eyes staring through the eye holes. The man is juggling 3 bowling pins. "Jesus Christ," John says. "You actually juggle?" The killer walks toward John and launches a pin at his head, hitting him square on the head. John crumbles to the floor of the shower. The group finishes their beers at the campsite. "I need to go to take a shower. I can't sleep like this," Cindy says, running her fingers through her tangled hair. Cindy walks to the washroom building. On approaching, she hears the shower running. She enters the shower building. "John?" she calls out, getting no answer. She hears moaning sounds. "John, stop playing around," she says. On turning the corner of the washroom toward the showers, she sees the killer in the process of dragging John's body along the floor. She lets out a deafening shriek, echoing through the forest. She turns to run from the building, but the killer picks up one of his bowling pins from the tile floor and flings it directly at the back of her head. The other 3 at the campsite discuss the shriek they just heard. "Frank, you hear that?" Bob asks, with his head sticking out from his tent. Frank unzips his tent with a joint in his mouth. "Yeah, sounded like Cindy." "You think it was that killer?" Bob asks. "Quite possibly," Frank replies. "Or just John playing a joke." "You think we should go to investigate?" "But then we could get killed too." But we have to check if Cindy and John are all right, don't we? I guess so. I've never been in this situation before. Here, take my knife. Go check it out, Frank says, reaching for the hunting knife in his pocket. Bob sighs as he accepts the responsibility, takes the knife, and heads for the shower building. Bob approaches the washroom building and sees the killer dragging Cindy by her ankles into the shower building. He stops, just outside of the illumination of the building's light. He freezes and whispers, "Jesus Christ," to himself. The killer looks out into the darkness, seemingly towards Bob. The killer picks up his pins and starts juggling. Bob turns and begins to run back for the campsite. "Run! Run! Run!" Bob yells hysterically as he approaches the campsite. Frank and Mary are standing together. "Run?" Mary asks. The... Bob pants, out of breath. "The killer. He got Cindy, and I think John too." "Do we really need to run, though?" Frank asks. "I think so," Bob replies. "He looked pretty big, and he has a creepy mask. And the pins." "Maybe me and you could take him down," Frank says. "I don't think so," Bob replies. "He seems proficient with those things. I think we should split up." "That's a good idea," Mary says, despite the inevitable fate that such an inadvisable decision, based on the results of past horror stories, may incur. The three split up, running aimlessly through the forest as the killer heads for their campsite. The beam of the killer's flashlight scans the forest, illuminating the helplessly flailing limbs of the escaping victims. He heads after Bob. Bob emerges from the forest and sees the campground office building in the distance. He circles the building and finds a cellar hatch at the rear of the building. He opens the hatch and heads into the dark, foreboding space. He moves carefully toward the darker rear of the cellar. Bob thinks he can hear someone's breath, and then bumps into a body. A broken bottle slashes Bob across his throat. Frank hears the person gasp. Frank then ignites his lighter and sees Bob's body on the ground. "Oh, fuck. Things are really going south," Frank says. Frank heads out of the cellar with the bloodied bottle, and as he swings the cellar door open, the killer whacks him over the head with a bowling pin. Frank's body falls back down into the cellar. The killer sees the bloody bottle and shines his flashlight into the cellar, seeing Bob's body. The killer scratches his head, confused. He counts on his hand the amount of people he remembers killing. It doesn't add up. The killer then hears the creak of the front door of the office building. Mary enters, locking the door behind her. Mary quietly makes her way through the office hallways and enters into a room at the rear of the building. She finds a closet and hides in it, shutting the door. The killer tries the front door, finding it locked. He then batters the door with a bowling pin to make a hole for his hand and reaches inside to unlock the door. Mary cracks open the door of the closet to see if she can get a visual on the killer, who is now inside the building. She sees the killer ominously walk by. She can hear him begin to check doors in other rooms. She quietly exits the closet and tries to make her escape. She tiptoes across the room. A floorboard creaks loudly. She no longer hears the killer. She peeks into the hallway and cannot see any signs of him. She moves through the dark hallway toward the front door. There are tense moments as Mary makes her way toward the door, with many opportunities for frightful scares in the dark. But it turns out to be quite uneventful, as the killer had been scoping out another hallway of the building, and she makes it to the front door. Mary abandons her caution as she loudly throws open the door, now running up the main road of the campground. The killer runs out of the office and begins chasing her. She trips on the rocky road, shrieking, looking back dramatically while gasping for air, making far too much of a scene out of a fairly standard fall to the ground. "For fuck's sake, Mary, get up and run." She weakly returns to her feet and continues running, turning to look at the killer more than she should. He is coming for her. There's no point on looking. Her running form seems to be messier than average. It is surprising that she is the last one standing. The killer begins to close the gap, within striking distance of Mary. Mary manages to zigzag from the throw of one of the killer's pins. The killer then begins swinging at her, his swings terribly off target for someone so proficient. How did these two end up in this situation? The killer reaches for her and grabs her by the back of the shirt, but Mary manages to unbutton her shirt and wrangle free, then turning to kick the killer in the nuts. The killer crumples. He is tired. It has been a long night for him. He gets back to his feet and begins chasing her down again. Mary is now gasping for dear life. Hearing the sounds of the main road, she screams for help. The lights of a car begin to come down the road. It's a tow truck. Mary waves it down. "Help! Help! Help!" she screams. The truck stops, and she runs for the passenger door, jumping into the truck. Go, go, get out of here, she says, panicked. The killer emerges in the headlights. What the hell is that guy wearing? Does he have bowling pins? The driver asks. Just fucking drive, Mary says. The killer approaches the van and throws a pin at the windshield. Hey, asshole, the driver says, exiting the truck and shoving the killer. The killer trips the man to the ground and whacks him over the head with a pin. Jesus Christ, Mary says to herself. The killer looks at Mary and begins heading for the truck. She swiftly hops into the driver's seat and shifts the vehicle into drive. She guns it at the killer, who tries to jump into the forest, but she clips his legs, seeming to disable him. She three-point turns the vehicle, running over the killer, hopefully disposing of him and preventing any future exploits, and drives out of Lost Hollow to her freedom.